The Marquis forced the seamstress on stage to be mocked, but her voice silenced the theatre. Before we begin this beautiful period romance story, tell me in the comments where you're listening from. I love knowing where you're joining me from. Venice, 1847. The canals shimmered beneath the lights of a city that had long ago learned to turn vanity into art. Gondolas glided silently toward the Teatro La Fenice, where the most powerful families of the lagoon gathered for an evening in honor of the Marquis di Ravello. Inside, the palace-born laughed and whispered, their fans fluttering like wings of restless birds. Among the shadows behind the velvet curtains, Isabella Moretti bent over a torn gown, her needle flashing beneath the glow of a single candle. She was not meant to be seen. Seamstresses were like the stitches of a dress, necessary, invisible, and quickly forgotten. "Faster, Isabella," murmured Signora Contini, the wardrobe mistress. "The Marchioness will throw a fit if that hem isn't perfect. She already called me a donkey for the lace." "I'm nearly done," Isabella said softly, her fingers moving with practiced grace. "Tell her the thread was stubborn. Tell her yourself. Never. She'd turn your face to salt with one look." The older woman laughed, then lowered her voice. "Still, if I were you, I'd hide that voice of yours tonight. The Marquis is in one of his moods." Isabella smiled faintly. "I'll keep to my work." But she hummed as she stitched, a tune her mother used to sing. A melody so tender it softened the harshest day. She thought no one heard her. She was wrong. Up on the balcony, the Marquis stood beside his guests, a glass of wine in hand, the image of aristocratic confidence. He had the careless beauty of a man who believed the world existed to amuse him. When he heard the faint melody rising from backstage, he turned toward the sound. "Who sings behind the curtain?" he asked idly. A servant bowed. "Only the seamstresses, my lord. They mend the costumes." "Ah, then let them mend in silence, unless—" He paused, a glint of mischief in his eyes. "Unless our evening could use a new performance." The Count of Braganza chuckled. "You mean to make the servants sing for us now? Why not? Venice adores novelty. Tonight we shall have one." He signaled to the conductor below. "Find the girl who hums like a nightingale. Bring her here." Whispers spread through the hall. Laughter followed. And before Isabella could understand what was happening, a pair of footmen appeared beside her. "The Marquis requests your presence," one said. I cannot go before the audience. I only mend dresses." "He insists." They led her through the side corridor and up toward the stage. The laughter grew louder. She saw the ocean of jewels, the shimmering masks. The faces turned toward her in curiosity and delight. Her knees weakened. The Marquis leaned on the balustrade. "Ladies and gentlemen, allow me to present tonight's final act, our palace seamstress. She has been caught serenading her needles. Let us judge if the sound is worth the song." A murmur of amusement swept the theatre. Someone whispered, "How charming, a servant's lullaby." "Please, my lord," Isabella pleaded in a trembling voice. "I cannot—" "Of course you can," he interrupted smoothly. "A moment ago you sang without knowing anyone listened. Surely now, with the finest ears in Venice before you, you will not refuse." She stood motionless, her hands clenched together. The lights from the chandeliers burned her eyes. The orchestra members exchanged uncertain glances. A few women hid smiles behind their fans. "Sing, child," said an older noblewoman with false sweetness. "The Marquis commands it." Isabella's heart pounded so violently she feared she would faint. She looked toward the exit, but the footman had closed the way. Shame prickled at her throat. "If I must," she whispered. The Marquis spread his arms. "You must." The audience quieted, expecting a ridiculous display. Isabella lifted her head. For an instant, she saw her mother's face, the calm smile of a woman who had once stood on this very stage, a singer whose name had been whispered with admiration until ruin silenced her. Isabella took one breath, then another, and began to sing. The first note trembled uncertain like a bird testing the air, then the sound deepened, swelling through the hall with a clarity that startled even her. It was a song of loss, of love buried under years of dust, of hope too proud to die. The melody climbed, pure and aching, wrapping itself around the chandeliers, through the marble columns, into every waiting heart. No one moved. The flutes lay silent on the music stands. The laughter that had filled the theatre evaporated. The Count of Braganza's smile faded. The Marchioness lowered her fan slowly, as if afraid to disturb the spell. Alessandro di Ravello felt the sound strike through him like a blade made of light. He had invited her to be mocked. Instead, she had stripped the entire hall of its arrogance. When the last note quivered into silence, there was no applause at first, only stunned quiet. Then, one by one, people rose to their feet. The applause thundered through the theatre, shaking the chandeliers. Isabella stood frozen, tears gathering in her eyes. The Marquis himself did not move. A gentleman in the front row whispered, "He found a miracle." But another leaned toward him. That voice, it reminds me of someone, of Lucia di Ravello, the singer who vanished 20 years ago. The name drifted to the Marquis's ears, and his hand tightened on the rail. He looked down at Isabella again, at her delicate features, the pendant at her throat glinting faintly under the lights, a small golden locket he had seen before, long ago, when another woman had worn it. The curtain fell slowly, and the audience's cheers echoed like waves. Isabella, trembling, turned to leave the stage, but the Marquis stepped forward, blocking her path. "You have surprised us all," he said quietly. She met his gaze, her voice low but steady. "Was that your intent, my lord, to surprise yourself?" He stared at her, unsure whether to feel anger or shame. Around them the crowd still shouted her name. "Who taught you that song?" he asked suddenly. "My mother." "And who was she?" Her lips parted, but before she could answer, an older nobleman approached from behind the Marquis and whispered close to his ear, "She sings with the same fire as Lucia di Ravello. Your old scandal." The Marquis froze. The color drained from his face. The murmur of the crowd faded into nothing. Lucia di Ravello, the woman he had once loved, ruined and forgotten. Isabella stood before him, waiting for his next word, unaware that her very name had reopened a wound he thought buried forever. Venice woke the next morning with only one topic on every tongue, the seamstress who had silenced La Fenice. Servants repeated the story in the markets, merchants retold it on the bridges, and the gondoliers sang her melody as they rowed along the canals. By noon, the name Isabella Moretti had drifted into salons and ballrooms that had never before spoken of anyone without a title. In the marble corridors of Palazzo di Ravello, Isabella sat beside her sewing basket, too overwhelmed to eat or speak. The same dress she had mended the night before lay across her knees, though her hands were motionless. Every sound of laughter from the upper floors felt sharper now, as though she were no longer part of that hidden world behind the curtains. Signora Contini burst in without knocking. "Child, do you understand what you have done? You are famous. The city cannot stop talking. The Marquis himself has had a dozen letters asking who you are." Isabella looked up. "Let him answer that I am no one." Contini placed her hands on her hips. "No one? You have become the jewel of Venice overnight. If you were wise, you would ask the Marquis for patronage. The impresarios will soon come for you." "Patronage?" Isabella repeated, bitterness rising in her throat. "And if I refuse? Then you will go back to hemming silk for ladies who will never look you in the eye. Choose, my dear. The world has finally opened its door." Before Isabella could reply, the door swung wider, and a liveried servant bowed. "The Marquis requests Miss Moretti's presence in the music room." Contini's face lit up. "There, you see? Go to him." Isabella hesitated. "Tell him I am unwell." The servant looked uneasy. "His lordship insists." Reluctantly she rose, smoothing her skirt. Her feet carried her through the long corridor, lined with portraits of proud men, each staring down with judgment. She had walked those halls countless times as a shadow. Now every passing servant stopped to stare openly. The music room was filled with morning light. The Marquis stood by the piano, a letter in his hand. He looked less certain than usual. When she entered, he dismissed the servants and turned toward her. "You have caused quite a sensation," he began. "La Fenice has not been so stirred in years." "I never meant to cause a sensation," she said. "I meant only to obey." He flinched at her tone. "Last night I behaved foolishly. My jest went too far. But I must know, where did you learn that song? My mother taught it to me." "And your mother's name?" "Lucia," she answered simply. He took a step closer. "Lucia di Ravello." Her silence was answer enough. The color drained from his face. He sank onto the piano bench, the letter trembling in his hand. "Then it is true," he murmured. "She had a child." Isabella stood rigid. She had a daughter. Alone. Because of you. He looked up sharply. You know my part in it? She told me everything before she died. How you promised to make her a star and then destroyed her name when she refused your advances. How she fled the city in disgrace. You took her stage, her honor, her life. He buried his face in his hands. I was a different man. No, Isabella said, her voice steady. You were the same man who mocked me last night. The words struck him harder than any blow. I did not recognize you, he whispered. If I had known, you would have humiliated another girl instead. He rose abruptly and paced the room. You have every right to despise me, but I would make amends if I could. Can a man amend the past? Perhaps not, he said quietly, but he can begin by facing it. She turned away. Do not pretend repentance to me, my lord. Venice already forgives its own nobles easily enough. I do not. He looked at her for a long moment. If you will not forgive me, then at least allow me to help you. You belong on the stage. Let me arrange it. I need nothing from you. You need protection, he insisted. The theatre world is cruel. You will find no mercy without influence. Let me at least give you that. Her answer was cold. The only protection I ever needed was taken from me by your name. The door opened suddenly, and a servant entered breathlessly. My lord, a messenger from the theatre. The Marquis waved him forward. The man handed over a sealed invitation. Alessandro broke the wax and read it aloud. They request that Miss Isabella Moretti sing again tomorrow night, at a gala for the visiting Austrian envoy. The servant glanced at Isabella. They say the audience demands it. The whole city waits. She looked from the messenger to the Marquis. So it begins, she said softly. Will you accept? I will sing, she said, but not for you. When she left the room, the Marquis stared after her, haunted by the face that echoed a past he had buried. The next evening, La Fenice was packed once again. Crowds pressed at the entrance, nobles elbowed for seats, and the orchestra tuned with nervous precision. Isabella stood in the wings, her dress borrowed but elegant. Signora Contini adjusted the folds of her gown. You must smile, Contini whispered. Venice adores a smile. I am not here to please Venice, Isabella said. Only to sing. She stepped into the light. The applause began before she even opened her mouth. When she sang, the hall quieted instantly. This time there was no trembling, no fear, only the certainty of someone reclaiming her mother's place. The melody rose like prayer and thunder together. The Marquis, seated in his box, could not look away. When the final chord faded, the ovation was overwhelming. The audience called her name again and again. She bowed once, then disappeared behind the curtain. The Marquis found her in the corridor moments later. You conquered them, he said. I conquered nothing. I only sang the truth. He stepped closer. Your voice carries her soul. When you sing, it is as if she breathes again. She looked at him sharply. Do not speak of her as if you mourned her. I do mourn her, he said, his voice low. I have for 20 years. You are all that remains of her. Something in his tone softened her anger, though she refused to show it. Then perhaps your punishment is to see her every time you see me. He said nothing. The silence between them was heavy, electric. From the end of the corridor came the sound of approaching footsteps. A group of noblemen entered, laughing. Among them was Count Braganza, who clapped the Marquis on the shoulder. Your little discovery has bewitched the city, the Count declared. Who would have thought a seamstress could rival the great divas? She is not my discovery, the Marquis replied curtly. Ah, modest as ever, the Count teased. Then turning to Isabella, my dear, the Marquis speaks of nothing but you. You have made him the envy of every man in Venice. Her cheeks flushed, but not with pleasure. Then Venice must have very little to envy, she said coldly. The Count blinked, unsure how to respond. The Marquis hid a faint smile. After they left, Isabella turned to him. They think I am your plaything. Do you see what you have done? I will silence them, he said. No, let them speak. Let them reveal what they are. I will answer them only with my voice. He watched her walk away, her head high, and something inside him shifted, a strange mixture of admiration and regret. In the following days, Venice's fascination with Isabella grew feverish. Letters arrived at the palazzo, invitations from noble houses, offers from theatre managers. Some praised her purity, others her beauty, but behind every compliment was speculation. Whispers spread that the Marquis had taken her under his protection in more ways than one. By the third week, the same people who had applauded her began to turn. Invitations stopped coming. Gossips laughed behind their fans. Contini brought the news in tears. "They say you are his mistress, Isabella. The women forbid their husbands to attend your performances." Isabella's face hardened. "They will not silence me again." That evening, at a grand ball hosted by the Grimani family, she appeared uninvited. The guests turned in surprise as she entered the hall in a simple gown. The Marquis, standing near the musicians, saw her immediately. Before he could reach her, his fiancée, Contessa Valeria Grimani, swept across the floor. "So this is the famous singer," Valeria said sweetly, "the one who charms audiences by pretending to be innocent." "I charm no one, Contessa," Isabella answered. "I only sing." Valeria's smile sharpened. "Then perhaps you should sing now, for the servants, since you are more their kind than ours." Laughter rippled among the guests. The Marquis stepped forward. "Enough, Valeria." But the Contessa ignored him. "Tell me, little seamstress, when you climb onto the stage, do you imagine yourself a lady? Or does he whisper that you are one?" The laughter grew louder. Isabella felt the heat rise in her face, but she met the Contessa's eyes. "When I climb onto the stage, I imagine my mother, who sang for kings while you were still learning to curtsy." The laughter stopped. Valeria's hand trembled around her fan. The Marquis took Isabella's arm gently. "Come away," he murmured. She pulled free. "Do not touch me, not here." Her voice was steady, though her heart was breaking. "I will not be your scandal or her amusement." She left the hall in silence, the eyes of the entire assembly following her. The Marquis stood motionless, torn between shame and helpless admiration. The next morning, a letter arrived at Isabella's small apartment near the canal. The handwriting was unmistakable. His. She hesitated, then broke the seal. Inside was a confession written with unexpected humility. He admitted to his cruelty toward Marquis di Ravello, how he had ruined her career out of wounded pride, how he had denied her the inheritance she was promised by an uncle who had favored her. Enclosed was a deed transferring that forgotten estate to Isabella. At the bottom, a single line: "I cannot restore her life, but I can restore her name." Tears blurred the ink as she read. For a long time she sat motionless, the letter trembling in her hand. Then she folded it carefully and placed it beside her mother's pendant. That evening, the city prepared for another gala at La Fenice, a charity event hosted by the Marquis himself. The whole of Venice was to attend, though whispers of scandal still surrounded them both. Isabella debated whether to go. Contini urged her, "He means to defend you tonight. Everyone will see his letter of donation to the orphanage. He wishes to show Venice his honor." "Honor cannot be displayed like jewelry," Isabella said. "Still, you must go. Let them see you stand tall." At last, she agreed. When she entered the theater, the chandeliers blazed, and the orchestra tuned in bright confusion. Nobles turned to stare, uncertain whether to applaud or whisper. She moved toward her seat, but a murmur spread through the crowd. The Marquis had taken the stage himself, dressed in formal black. The conductor raised his baton. The Marquis's voice carried across the hall. "Tonight's performance is dedicated to truth, and to the one who reminded me what it sounds like." He turned toward Isabella. "Miss Moretti will join me in song." Gasps rippled through the audience. Isabella froze where she stood. Someone whispered behind her, "He will sing beside her." A nobleman with a servant. She felt every gaze upon her. Slowly she rose, but her mind was spinning. What was he planning? A public apology? Or another humiliation disguised as generosity? When she reached the foot of the stage, the orchestra began to play, and the Marquis extended his hand toward her. She stared at him, uncertain whether to take it. The crowd waited. Her heart pounded as she stepped closer. The Marquis's eyes met hers, steady and unreadable. The conductor's baton hovered in the air. Then, as the music swelled, she realized what he had chosen to sing, the same duet her mother had once performed on this very stage. Her breath caught in her throat. The curtain lifted fully, and the audience fell silent. When she looked up at him again, she saw not arrogance, but something entirely new: remorse. and the thought came to her like a whisper she could not escape. This man was about to confess before all of Venice. The orchestra began softly, strings trembling like a held breath. Isabella stood motionless at the edge of the stage. The Marquis's hand was still outstretched, patient, waiting. The audience leaned forward, uncertain if this was theatre or scandal. Finally, she placed her hand in his. The hall seemed to exhale. Their voices met, hesitant at first, then finding harmony. The duet unfolded like a dialogue, her tone bright and defiant, his deep and full of regret. When the final note faded, applause erupted, loud and astonished. Isabella turned away from him before the curtain closed, her face pale, her hands shaking. Backstage, she pulled free from the stagehands who crowded to congratulate her. The Marquis followed at a distance, his expression unreadable. "You forced me again," she said when he caught up to her. "Another command, another performance, another scene for your amusement." "No," he replied quietly. "It was not amusement. It was confession. I did not hear an apology, because words are weak beside what I owe you." "Then say them anyway." He stepped closer. "I am sorry for every humiliation I caused you, and for the one I gave your mother. You have every right to hate me, but I will spend what remains of my life trying to deserve the sound of your forgiveness." She stared at him, speechless. He continued, his voice breaking slightly. "You think me arrogant still, and you are right. I spent years believing I could shape the world to my pleasure. You and your mother were both victims of that vanity. I would undo it if I could." Isabella's throat tightened. "Undo it? My mother died nameless. I grew up in silence, sewing gowns for women who would not remember my face. You cannot undo that." "No," he said, "but I can give her name back to the city that took it from her. I can make them see who she was." "And what of me?" He hesitated. "You are already beyond their reach. They will speak your name with reverence one day." Her eyes filled with tears, but her voice was calm. "Reverence from the same mouths that mocked me? I do not want their reverence. I want peace." She turned to leave, but he caught her hand. "Isabella." She pulled away. "You can buy applause, my lord, not peace." He watched her disappear into the corridor. The applause still echoed beyond the curtain, hollow now, like distant thunder. The next morning, the city's newspapers carried sketches of the duet. A miracle of redemption, one called it. Another praised the Marquis for discovering genius from the humblest corner. Isabella threw the papers into the canal. By noon, the rumors had returned, uglier than before. People whispered that the Marquis planned to make her his mistress openly, that her tears on stage had been rehearsed to win sympathy. Some said the duet had been a mockery of holy music. The church murmured its disapproval. When Isabella returned to her lodgings, she found Signora Contini waiting at the door with red eyes. "They are closing the theatre to you," she said. "The impresarios say it is too dangerous. They fear the scandal will drive away the nobility." "So now I am dangerous," Isabella said. "Child, you must leave Venice. Go to Verona. I will come with you if you ask. I will not run. Then you will be crushed. Let them try." She entered her small room and locked the door. On the table lay the Marquise's letter and the deed to her mother's estate. She stared at them for a long time. Finally, she folded the papers and slipped them into a drawer. Later that evening, footsteps echoed in the corridor. A knock sounded on the door. "Who is it?" "Alessandro di Ravello." "I have nothing to say." "I ask only a moment." She hesitated, then opened the door halfway. He looked pale, exhausted. "You have heard the rumors." "I have lived among rumors since the night you called me to the stage. They will destroy your name if I do nothing. My name has survived worse. Then let me stand beside you." "Beside me?" she said sharply. "To what end? To prove their gossip true? To silence it? To show them what they refuse to see? That you are the most honorable soul in Venice?" She shook her head. "Honor cannot be declared by a marquis. It must be earned by a man." He looked at her as if struck. "You believe I cannot change. I believe you do not yet know how." For a moment he said nothing. Then he reached into his coat and handed her a folded envelope. "I am leaving Venice tonight. I go to Verona to settle matters of your mother's estate. It is yours now. I only ask that you trust me long enough to finish what I began." She accepted the envelope slowly. "Why would you do this?" "Because I cannot bear what I did to her, or to you. If this is my punishment, I accept it. She watched him turn to leave. Marquis, she said softly, do you truly think forgiveness can be bought with deeds and signatures? He paused. No, but perhaps it can begin there. He left, without another word. Days passed. Venice turned its attention to other scandals. Isabella stayed hidden, refusing invitations. But the emptiness pressed around her. She missed the stage, the sound of the orchestra, the trembling hush before a note. One afternoon, Contini rushed into her room. The Marquis has returned, she gasped. He came to La Fenice today. He says he wishes to announce something tonight. What does he wish to announce? No one knows, but he has invited the entire city, even the Contessa Grimani. Isabella felt her stomach twist. Then it will be another spectacle. Contini caught her hands. Perhaps it will be an ending. When night fell, Isabella dressed simply and went to the theatre. The audience filled every seat, buzzing with curiosity. The Marquis stood alone on stage, holding a single sheet of paper. My friends, he began, you know me as a man of titles and possessions. Tonight I stand before you as a man of debt, a debt to a woman who once sang here, whose voice I silenced by vanity and pride. Her name was Marquis di Ravello. Venice owes her an apology, and I begin by giving it. The crowd murmured in astonishment. He unfolded the paper. This document restores her estate and fortune to her rightful heir, Isabella Moretti, whose voice you have already heard. She will continue her mother's legacy, not as my ward, but as the rightful artist of La Fenice. A wave of whispers spread. The Contessa Grimani rose abruptly from her seat. You would ruin your name for a servant? He faced her calmly. It was ruined long ago when I destroyed hers. Tonight, I repair what I can. The applause began slowly, uncertainly, but it grew until the walls trembled. Isabella stood frozen in the wings, tears stinging her eyes. The Marquis turned toward her, seeking her gaze, but she vanished into the darkness before he could find her. After the crowd dispersed, he found her outside near the canal, the reflection of lanterns flickering on the water. You did not stay for the end, he said quietly. I have heard enough. You disapprove. I am grateful, she said. But gratitude is not love, and forgiveness is not surrender. You have freed me, but that does not mean you belong to me, or I to you. He nodded slowly. Then I will wait. For what? For the day you look at me, without remembering her pain. She looked away. That day may never come. He smiled faintly. Then I will wait forever. He bowed and left her standing by the water. Weeks passed. Isabella traveled briefly to Verona to see the estate her mother had been denied. It was small, quiet, surrounded by olive trees. She stayed only long enough to leave flowers by a grave that bore no name. When she returned to Venice, she found the city's gossip had softened. People now spoke of her as a symbol of courage, but the theatre still hesitated to invite her back. One afternoon, Contini entered with fresh news. The Marquis is giving a concert to benefit the orphanage. He has asked that you perform the final piece. Isabella frowned. He will never stop, will he? Perhaps he needs to finish his penance, or perhaps he needs me to finish mine. That night she went to La Fenice again. The audience was smaller, more subdued. The Marquis greeted her backstage. Thank you for coming, he said. I came because the children deserve the help, she replied, and because music is your truth, he added gently. When she walked on stage, she saw him seated near the piano, waiting. The orchestra began the slow, sorrowful melody she had chosen. She sang not of vengeance now, but of release. Every note carried her mother's memory and her own forgiveness. When she finished, the applause was warm, but not thunderous. It was the quiet approval of people who had been changed by what they heard. As she left the stage, the Marquis followed her into the wings. You sang of peace tonight, he said. I tried to. Did you find it? Not yet, she whispered. Then let me help you search for it. She looked at him for a long time. You would give up your title for that? He smiled faintly. Titles are fragile things. Peace is rarer. Before she could answer, one of the theatre's attendants approached them breathlessly. My lord, the impresario requests you both. The audience demands an encore, a duet. The Marquis turned to her, surprised. Will you? She hesitated, then nodded. The audience stirred as they reappeared. The orchestra struck the first notes of the same duet they had sung before, But this time something was different. Their voices rose not in battle but in reconciliation. When the final chord faded, there was a hush, deeper than any applause. Isabella felt tears burning her eyes. She turned to the Marquis, meaning to thank him, but the sight of his face silenced her. He looked as though he had seen a ghost. She followed his gaze and saw the Contessa Valeria Grimani standing in the shadows near the side door, her expression hard and cold. The Marquis's voice dropped to a whisper. "She will not forgive what I have done." Before Isabella could speak, the Contessa turned and disappeared into the night. The applause began, confused and scattered, while the Marquis's eyes remained fixed on the empty doorway. Something in his face told Isabella that whatever peace they had found would soon be tested again. The morning after the duet, the city seemed to breathe easier. The scandal had run its course. Venice had grown tired of gossip and found new distractions. Isabella walked along the narrow calle that bordered the Grand Canal, her shawl drawn close. For the first time in months, no one stopped her to whisper or stare. It felt strange, almost quiet. When she reached La Fenice, the stage door stood open. Inside, the Marquis was speaking with the conductor. He looked different, simpler somehow, the pride stripped away. When he saw her, he excused himself and crossed the empty hall toward her. "You came," he said softly. "I said I would." He studied her face, as if uncertain where to begin. "Valeria has left Venice. Her family demanded it. She blames me for her humiliation, but perhaps I should thank her. I no longer owe anyone false courtesies." "I am sorry," Isabella said, though her tone held no triumph. He shook his head. "No, you are not. And you shouldn't be. Some chains must break loudly to be gone." They walked together down the center aisle toward the stage. Dust floated in the shafts of light from the high windows. "The impresario wants you to open the next season," he said. "A new opera written for your voice." "For my voice?" she repeated. He nodded. "The composer is young and ambitious. He wrote it after hearing you sing that first night. He calls it the Song of Lucia." Her breath caught. "He uses her name." "Yes. It is a story of a woman who forgives the man who once betrayed her." "I thought you might refuse it." "I should," she said, smiling faintly. "But I will not. My mother would have liked that story." He smiled too, though there was sadness in his eyes. "Then Venice shall hear her name again, not whispered, but celebrated." The following weeks were filled with rehearsals. The theatre came alive with music and movement. Isabella worked tirelessly, her voice blooming stronger with every aria. The Marquis attended each rehearsal, though he stayed quietly in the shadows. When the orchestra stopped, he would bring her water or place a cloak over her shoulders. Their conversations grew gentler, no longer filled with anger or pride, but a quiet companionship. One afternoon, as she finished a difficult passage, she turned to him and laughed. "You watch me like a man guarding treasure." "Perhaps I am," he replied. "I lost too much once. I will not lose again." "Do not say that," she warned lightly. "Music belongs to the wind. You cannot keep it." "I do not wish to keep it," he said. "Only to be near it." The night of the premiere arrived. All Venice came, merchants, nobles, foreign guests. The air was charged with anticipation. Behind the curtain, Isabella stood calm, her hands folded. The Marquis joined her for a moment before the overture began. "Do you remember that first night?" he asked quietly. "I remember trembling so hard I could barely breathe. And now? Now I tremble for another reason." He smiled. "Then it is the right kind of fear." The curtain rose. The orchestra swelled. Isabella stepped into the light and sang. Her voice carried over the audience like a wave, pure and luminous. Every note told the story of a woman's sorrow turned into grace. The Marquis listened from the side, motionless. By the second act, tears glistened on many faces. In the final scene, Isabella sang alone under a single beam of light. Her voice quivered with both pain and forgiveness. When she finished, silence filled the hall for several seconds. Then came applause so fierce it shook the floor. Flowers rained down from the balconies. The conductor bowed to her, overwhelmed. Isabella, breathless and radiant, looked toward the Marquis. He bowed his head slightly, his eyes shining. When the curtain fell, she hurried to him. "You heard them," she said, laughing through tears. "They know her name now." "They know yours," he replied. "No," she said gently. "They are the same name now." The impresario entered, beaming. "A triumph, my dear. A triumph for all Venice. We must give another performance at once." The Marquis thanked him and guided Isabella away from the noise of celebration. They walked into the empty corridor that led to the private boxes. The echoes of the applause still vibrated through the marble walls. "Does it feel like victory?" he asked. "It feels like release," she said. "The weight is gone." He nodded. "Then my debt is paid." "There was never a debt," she replied. "Only understanding waiting to be found." He looked at her for a long time, his voice unsteady. "You have forgiven me, then?" "I have," she said simply. "And I forgive myself too, for the hatred I carried. It only chained me to the past." He reached for her hand. "And what of the future?" She smiled. "That we shall see." Outside, the bells of San Marco began to ring, marking midnight. Their sound drifted into the corridor like a benediction. In the days that followed, Isabella became the soul of Venice. The opera continued to draw full houses, and visitors traveled from Milan and Florence just to hear her. She used her earnings to open a small music school for orphaned girls, teaching them the same lessons her mother once whispered by candlelight. The Marquis supported the school quietly, without title or announcement. He no longer hosted grand parties or sought attention. He spent his mornings in his study and his evenings at the theatre, always seated in the same place, listening as if the music itself were confession. One afternoon, he arrived at the school unannounced. The students curtsied shyly as he entered. Isabella looked up from the piano. "This is a surprise," she said. "I wanted to see what peace looks like," he replied. She laughed softly. "It looks like practice and patience." He watched as the girls sang a simple hymn. When they finished, he applauded quietly. "You have done more good in 6 months than I did in a lifetime," he said. "That is not true." "It is," he insisted. "I built walls. You opened doors." She looked at him with warmth. "We both built something new from ruin. That is what matters." He nodded slowly. "I have something to ask you," he said at last. "And I do not ask lightly." She waited. He drew a small box from his coat and opened it. Inside lay a ring of gold, simple and old-fashioned. "This belonged to my mother," he said. "It was the only thing she gave me that still feels honest. I would give it to you if you will have it." She stared at him, speechless. "You need not answer now," he added quickly. "If your heart still doubts, keep it until it no longer does." Isabella reached out and closed the box gently. "You have changed, Alessandro, because you sang me into change," he said quietly. Her eyes softened. "Then perhaps my answer has already been sung." He smiled, but before he could speak, one of the girls approached, clutching a sheet of music. "Signorina, will you sing this with us?" Isabella laughed. "Another time, Rosa." But the child shook her head. "Now, please, it is your song, the song of Lucia." The Marquis stepped back as the girls gathered around. Isabella began to sing, her voice light, the melody gentle and full of joy. The Marquis listened with his eyes closed, his hand resting over his heart. When the song ended, he bowed his head. That evening, after the lesson, Isabella and the Marquis walked along the canal. The city glowed in the reflected sunset. "I sometimes wonder," she said, "if my mother sees this." "She does," he answered softly. "Every note you sing tells her so." They walked in silence, the air warm and quiet. When they reached the theatre square, a messenger hurried toward them. "Signorina Moretti, the impresario asks that you come at once. The Austrian ambassador is in attendance. He requests a special encore, your duet with the Marquis." She turned to Alessandro, startled. "You?" He laughed. "I did not know I was requested." "You must have impressed them," she teased, "only because they mistake my trembling for passion." "Then let us tremble together," she said. A few moments later they stood once more beneath the gilded ceiling of La Fenice. The orchestra prepared the duet. The audience leaned forward in expectation. As the music began, Isabella and the Marquis sang, not as servant and noble nor as sinner and judge, but as two souls who had found each other through repentance and courage. Their voices intertwined like prayer. When the final note faded, the applause seemed endless. The audience rose to their feet, calling her name, then his. Isabella turned to him, her eyes shining. "You see," she said, "forgiveness sings louder than pride." He took her hand. "And love louder than both." They bowed together. As the curtain closed, the theatre lights dimmed, and the audience's cheers continued like waves rolling through the night. Outside, the bells began to ring again, their sound mingling with the echo of their song. Backstage, the impresario approached, flushed with excitement. "We must announce your next performance immediately. The whole of Europe will come to hear you both." Isabella laughed. "Then they will have to wait until we rest." The Marquis smiled at her side, and for the first time there was no shadow between them, only the quiet understanding of two hearts at peace. From somewhere in the wings, a child's voice called out softly, "Signorina, they are asking for one more encore." Isabella turned toward the stage, her laughter bright, and Alessandro di Ravello looked at her with a calm that felt like forever. The morning after the encore, Venice glittered beneath a pale gold sun. Bells rang from San Marco, echoing through the canals. Everywhere people spoke of Isabella Moretti and the Marquis di Ravello. The scandal that had once divided the city now bound it in admiration. In the markets, gondoliers hummed her melodies. In the salons, noblewomen pretended they had always believed in her. But Isabella did not care for the talk of Venice anymore. She stood by her window, watching a small boat glide toward the palazzo across the canal. Her heart knew whose silhouette moved inside. A knock sounded. "Come in," she said. Alessandro entered, holding a bouquet of white camellias. "They are from the gardens at Ravello," he said. "The first of the season. They're beautiful." He placed them on the table. "As are you when you are quiet like this. It reminds me of the moment before a song begins." She smiled faintly. "You still think in music?" "You taught me to," he said. "Every silence has rhythm now." She looked down at the flowers. "You came early. Did something happen?" "Yes," he said softly. "Something has ended." She lifted her eyes. "Ended? My title. I have signed it away. The estates are now under my cousin's care. I keep only the house near Verona. Yours if you still wish it. I am no longer the Marquis di Ravello, only Alessandro." She stared at him. "You did this for me?" "I did it because I could not belong to two worlds. You live in truth. I lived in pride. If we are to walk together, it must be as equals." Her voice trembled. "And if I say yes to that, what would you have of me?" He stepped closer. "Only the same courage you have always shown. Nothing more." She reached up, touching his face gently. "You have changed beyond recognition, and yet," he whispered, "it is the first time I truly recognize myself." They stood like that for a long moment, until the sound of the canal broke the stillness. Their gondolier sang a verse from her aria, and she laughed through her tears. "Come," he said, "walk with me." They left by the side door and crossed the bridge toward the piazza. The air smelled of spring and sea salt. Street vendors called out greetings, and children bowed as they passed. Isabella lowered her eyes, still shy beneath so much attention. "They love you," Alessandro said. "They love the story," she answered. "It makes them believe redemption exists. Then we owe them proof that it does." They stopped before the steps of La Fenice. The theatre doors were open for rehearsal, and music drifted through the marble hall. The impresario spotted them and hurried forward, bowing deeply. "Signorina Moretti, Signor Alessandro, you have saved this theatre. The king himself has written in praise of your performance." "We only sang," Isabella said modestly. "Ah, but with such truth," the impresario replied. "There will be a new season, and we wish to begin it with a gala in your honor." Alessandro looked at her. "What do you think?" "I think I would rather sing for joy than for titles," she said. "Let it be a charity concert for the school." "Perfect," said the impresario, clapping his hands. "Venice will adore it." He hurried away, leaving them in the echoing hall. Isabella turned to Alessandro. "A gala for the children. It feels right." "It does," he said. "And it will be our farewell to the stage." Her eyes widened. "Farewell? I have made arrangements to leave Venice after the performance, to build a smaller life in Verona, near your mother's home. The house needs laughter again." She was silent for a moment. "And you would have me there?" "I would have no one else." The orchestra began playing a waltz behind the closed doors. Without a word, he extended his hand. She hesitated, then placed hers in his. He drew her close, and they began to move slowly across the empty foyer, their steps guided by the distant rhythm. "Do you realize," he said softly, "that this is the first time I have ever danced without an audience?" She smiled. "Then let it be the first of many." When the music ended, he did not let go. "Marry me, Isabella." Her breath caught. "Here, here now, before anything can change my courage." She laughed through her tears. "Alessandro, you are impossible." "Say yes," he whispered. "Yes." He closed his eyes, as if her answer were the most fragile sound he had ever heard. That evening, the city filled with celebration. The news spread faster than the tide. Isabella Moretti would marry the man who had once ruined her mother. But this time, Venice did not sneer. The story had turned into a legend of forgiveness, and even the proudest nobles bowed to it. The bells rang as guests crowded into La Fenice for the charity gala. The theatre glowed with candlelight. Isabella stood backstage, dressed in a gown of pale blue silk, her mother's pendant at her throat. Alessandro waited near the wings, no longer in formal regalia, but in simple evening clothes. "Are you ready?" he asked. "As ready as one can be when the heart won't stay still." He smiled. "Then let it race, it suits you." The conductor raised his baton. The orchestra began the overture to the Song of Lucia. Isabella stepped into the light, greeted by a roar of applause. She sang with a joy that seemed to lift the entire hall. The music no longer carried sorrow, it carried gratitude. When the final note ended, the audience rose to its feet. Alessandro joined her on stage, taking her hand. The applause grew louder, echoing through the golden balconies. Then, in front of all Venice, he turned to her and said, "You gave me a soul when I thought I had none left. You gave my life a melody again. Will you be my wife before these witnesses?" The audience fell silent. Isabella looked into his eyes, her voice clear and steady. "Yes, for as long as we both shall breathe." The crowd erupted in cheers. Flowers rained from the balconies once more, and the orchestra struck up a triumphant march. The conductor, grinning, waved to a priest seated among the guests who stepped forward, blessing them quietly as the applause thundered around. Later, when the hall had emptied and the candles burned low, Isabella and Alessandro remained on the darkened stage. The city outside hummed softly through the windows. He took her hands. "Tomorrow we leave for Verona. I have arranged everything. You will have your school there, and I will try to keep the garden alive." She smiled. "And what will we do when the garden sleeps in winter?" "Then we will sing to it," he said, "to remind it of spring." She laughed, resting her head against his shoulder. "You've become a poet." "No," he whispered. "Just a man who listens now." They stayed that way until dawn, when the light began to spill through the high windows, painting the stage in silver. A week later, they sailed along the river toward Verona. The water glimmered under the sun, and flocks of swallows darted above. Isabella leaned against the railing, her hair loose in the wind. "Do you regret leaving Venice?" Alessandro asked. "No," she said. "Venice will always sing behind us, but peace lies ahead." He nodded. "You are not afraid?" "Not anymore. I have faced worse than uncertainty." They arrived at the small estate by evening. The house stood among olive trees, quiet and bright. The air smelled of jasmine. Isabella stepped inside, touched the worn piano in the corner, and smiled. "It feels alive already," she said. "It has been waiting," he answered. That night, they sat outside beneath the stars. Crickets sang in the grass. Alessandro poured wine, and they watched the lights of the nearby village flicker. "Do you miss the applause?" he asked. "Sometimes," she admitted, "but it was never the applause that moved me. It was the silence that followed, the moment when the heart understands." He took her hand. "Then, may we live in that silence forever." She looked at him tenderly. "Forever is a long song, Alessandro." "Then let us sing it slowly." He leaned closer, his voice barely a breath. "You once told me music belongs to the wind. Tonight I believe it belongs to us." She smiled. "Then let the wind listen." Their lips met softly, the sound of the river folding around them. It was not the rush of passion born from haste, but the deep warmth of two souls, finally unafraid. When dawn broke, the first light touched their faces. Birds began to sing, and Isabella stirred, laughing quietly. "They are applauding," she said. "Then the performance must go on," he replied. In the months that followed, the house filled with music and laughter. Isabella's school flourished. Girls from nearby villages came to learn. Alessandro helped them plant gardens, repair instruments, and build a small stage beneath the olive trees. One afternoon, as the sun dipped low, The students begged for a performance. Isabella agreed. She and Alessandro sang together, their voices rising through the twilight. Villagers gathered outside the fence to listen, the melody carrying across the hills. When the song ended, applause echoed once again, softer than the theatre's roar but truer. Isabella turned to him, her eyes full of light. "You see? Music finds its way, even here." He smiled. "So does love." That night, after the last candle was out, they stood on the balcony, watching the stars ripple across the dark sky. "Do you ever think of the first night?" she asked. "Every day," he said. "It began in cruelty and ended in grace. I have spent every breath since trying to deserve that miracle. And have you?" He looked at her quietly. "You are here beside me. That is miracle enough." She rested her head on his shoulder, the pendant at her throat catching the moonlight. The wind carried the faint sound of the students' voices, singing her melody inside the house. Isabella closed her eyes and listened. "Do you hear that?" she whispered. "I do," he said. "It is my mother's song, and ours." "Yes," he murmured. "And it will never end." Thank you so much for listening to this story all the way to the end. We hope it moved you as much as it moved us while telling it. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave us a comment telling us where you're listening from and what you liked the most. Rate this story from 0 to 10. What score would you give it? If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and leave a like as a show of support. That really motivates us to keep creating and sharing more stories full of emotion and life lessons. And before we go, we want to remind you that an exciting and heartwarming story recommendation will appear on the final screen. If you'd like to enjoy it, just click on the video. Thank you once again for being here, and we'll see you in the next story.